everyone, welcome to Veganic Gardener's Question Time. I'm really happy that you're joining us today. My name is Meg Kelly, and I'm so happy to have been invited by the Vegan Organic Network to host this episode of Veganic Gardener's Question Time with our wonderful panelists. So I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Meg, and I co-founded the Veganic Agriculture Network back in 2008 to help promote veganic farming and gardening, especially over in North America. And I also run the Learn Veganic Gardening course, where we teach people how they can grow their own fruits and veggies at home using entirely plant-based techniques. So if you'd like to learn more about that, you can visit learnveganic.com. And our summer session right now is open for enrollment. And if you'd like to join us for the Learn Veganic course, you can save $20 by using the code VEG20. And I'd also like to tell you about our free guide to 20 veganic materials to improve fertility in your plant-based garden. This is a guide that covers, which veganic materials are higher in nitrogen, higher in phosphorus, good at building soil, and it goes through 20 different materials so that we have lots of options to draw from for growing our veganic gardens. You can get that for free at learnveganic.com/materials. So wonderful. And before we introduce, yes, I was just on a podcast this week through the Vegan Family Kitchen. So you can also go check out that podcast by going to veganfamilykitchen.com and looking for their latest episode. So before we introduce our panelists, I'd like to tell you about the Vegan Organic Network's new Veganic Farm Map. So this is a new project to help map out around the world where you can find veganic gardeners in your area. So you can meet up with like-minded gardeners by getting in contact with them through the farm map, whether you have a forest garden, an allotment, or even just one plant. We welcome you to join the farm map if you're using veganic methods. And organizations that practice veganic gardening, such as schools, garden centers, community projects, research institutes, and restoration projects are also welcome to join the map. And the map can be used to get in contact with people, to trade advice, to swap seeds, to have meetups, to trade veggies, to share allotment gardens, and just to be able to connect with other like-minded people. So joining the map will help spread the word that veganic growing is good for the soil, encourages biodiversity, and produces healthy, nutritious food. And Stockfree organic farms who grow veganic produce will also be featured on the map. So if you're ready to join the Roots Revolution and get on the Veganic Farm Map, you can go to veganorganic.net/join/map and you can join. Also to mention that the Vegan Organic Network will be at the London Permaculture Festival on Saturday and at the Kind Hearts Festival the following week. So if you'd like to meet up with people from the Vegan Organic Network in person, that's the place to be. So we're going to start by meeting our panelists today. Our first panelist is Mathew Appleby, who is a journalist, and he's also the editor of Growing Green International, which is the Vegan Organic Network's magazine that is dedicated to veganic growing. So hi, Mathew. It's wonderful to have you here with us today.
Hi, Meg. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. And can you tell us a bit more about Growing Green International magazine?
Oh, well, I've been looking after it with my colleague, Paul Hanson, just for a couple of issues now, having taken over from Tony Martin, who we'll meet in a minute. And I've been enjoying it a lot. And if anybody wants to submit any articles, please do.
Yeah, and can you tell us about some of the topics that were maybe covered in the most recent issue or the ones that are going to be covered in the upcoming issue?
Well, the most recent issue, we had a big piece with George Monbiot, the Guardian journalist and campaigner, and we recently had that broadcast on the website. And in the forthcoming issue, I've got a piece with Cleve West, who's a world-leading garden designer, but also a very passionate and campaigning vegan.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Mathew. And how can people get in contact with you if they'd like to submit an article?
Well, I will. I'll come up with a. Well, you can use my email address. But yeah, I mean, what we say, Matt Appleby1 at But people might spell that wrong, but it's on the website. You can get in touch. It's all
Okay,
on
wonderful. So people can go to the Vegan Organic Network website and get in touch with Mathew Appleby if they would like to submit articles for Growing Green. So thank you very much, Mathew, and look forward to getting your gardening advice today. We're also being joined by Keith Robertson, and Keith is the founder of the Scottish School of Herbal Medicine at Drimlabarra Herb Farm on the Isle of Arran. And Keith, I'd like to know more about your center and if there's any courses and events that are coming up.
The next course we have is a 7-day in September, and that's residential.
Is that a permaculture course or an herbalism course?
Herbal medicine.
Okay, wonderful.
But yeah, we've been growing veganically here for the past 23 years. So we have a total of 16 acres. A lot of it is left for wildlife. But we grow a lot of fruit bushes, a lot of black currants, and loads of herbs and stuff. So, and then we have a correspondence course, which is a 10-month correspondence course, 1 year correspondence course in basic herbal medicine, and that feeds into the other degree courses. Yeah, we have courses throughout the year. So the website is veganherbal.com.
Okay, veganherbal.com. Okay, yeah. Thanks very much, Keith. And I look forward to hearing some of your advice about, you've got such a wide range of experience being an herbalist and a veggie grower. So it'll be wonderful to hear some of your advice for people today.
Pleasure.
Great. And we also are being joined today by Tony Martin. And Tony Martin studied permaculture, and he has recently moved to a 1.5 acre small holding in Carmarthen. So Tony, can you tell us more about this new land that you're on and what you're starting to grow there?
Hi, yeah. Well, my old place was a bit steep, which made things a little trickier. So this place is a lot more level, which is great. This year I'm trying a range of stuff, but we've had a lot of ongoing stuff with the house and the land, sorting that out. So we haven't got as far as we'd like, but we're doing sweet corn, pumpkins, courgettes, sweet potatoes, nice. Soybeans. In fact, soybeans last year did quite well. So yeah, a whole range of things really.
Well, wonderful. And I'm going to be interested in seeing how your gardens progress over the years as you get them set up.
Hopefully we'll share that in an article sometime.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Hopefully we'll share that in an article sometime.
Yeah, that would be wonderful to see some of those updates. So I know we have a lot of questions waiting for us, so we can start diving into those. And let's see what our first question is. So oftentimes they'll pop up on the screen, but I'm not sure if that's going to happen today. Oh, yes, we do have a question. Wonderful. Thank you. So we have a question from Alan, and he has a question about picking homegrown organic potatoes. And his question for the panel is, when is the best time to pick his homegrown potatoes? And he's growing these potatoes in bags rather than directly in the garden. So who would like to take a shot at this one and give us some advice about the best time? Yeah, go for it, Keith.
Tatties, Isle of Arran, very famous for its potatoes. Still being grown. Some of the varieties, Arran Pilot, done as a first early. If you've heard of that, Arran Banner, Arran, lots of Arran potatoes. So the best time to pick potatoes is just before you eat them. It depends on what you've got and when you planted them, I suppose. You've got earlies, second earlies, and main crop. And kind of depends. You get the earlies in early. Main crops go in later, obviously. So, but I suppose a rule of thumb is the first earlies, you can harvest them as soon as they flower. And so people are digging the potatoes now, end of June. Second earlies, it's going to be into July and August. So mainly July and August. It just depends if blight hits, and if you get any damage to the foliage at all, then you want to to chop that down and remove it safely. I suppose you have to be very careful how you dispose of that as well. And then the potatoes can't stay in the ground. Even if you have blight, you're best to chop the foliage, remove it, and then don't dig them for at least a fortnight. The spores will be on the top of the ground, but I think they do diminish. And then if they're in pots, then I've harvested them, dug them up for Christmas, you know. So if you let the compost dry out slightly, and you can leave them in the ground. Just depends on your soil, I suppose. If it's very heavy soil, then they might rot. The rats might find them, but sometimes they're safer in the ground. But he's saying in bags. Yeah, first earlies when it's flowered, main crop and the rest of them back end of August, when after it's flowered and the foliage has died down. How's that? Do you guys agree?
Yeah. I mean, you could add to that it depends as well whether you want the maximum crop or whether you want some nice small young potatoes for boiling up with a bit of marge, etc. And if they're in pots, obviously you can perhaps move them to somewhere where they're not going to be attacked by rats, etc. Which I've had problems with rats in the past. So if they are in containers, you can still keep them in their containers, but move them somewhere safe.
Cool.
Meg has disappeared, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to ask some questions. Oh, here we go. I think she's reappeared. Here we go. Dun, dun, dun.
Hi there. I had a
You
little
okay, Meg?
difficulty. Yeah, I got kicked off and now I'm back. So we'll pick up where we left. Was anyone still adding something to the potatoes, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, move on.
All right, Dan, if you could pop up the next question for us, that would be wonderful. So I try and grow something new every year that I've never grown before. And this year I'm trying Turk's turban squash. Some of my trials work so well that they become regulars. What new things have the team grown recently? So this is a question from Jake. And who would like to share with us something new that they've been trying in their gardens in recent years? I think Tony might be answering us on mute. Tony, if you'd like to unmute.
Sorry, I was coughing then, so I was trying to mute myself out there. I've been trying sweet potatoes last year. We've got a nice polytunnel. It's one of these which is a twin wall polycarb, so it keeps in heat quite well. And also I've got lots of containers of water in there which store heat and gives you a bit more of an even growing temperature. Last year it was a bit of a jungle in there, so I didn't quite get as much crop as I'd hoped, but I did get one great big sweet potato like this and quite a bunch of smaller ones, which were very nice. I think it will do a lot better this year because I've got a lot less plants, a lot less tomatoes in there. And the other thing was soybeans, which did pretty well. I probably got about, for everyone planted, 50 beans out or something like that. So I'm trying it with a few more plants this year. And they came out pretty much the same size I put them in. They were just ones bought from some organic store somewhere. The sweet potatoes were from a local organic fruit veg place. I've had luck with those a couple of years running now. But this year I've tried garlic and turmeric again, and they don't seem to have germinated. So I don't know whether it's lack of heat or perhaps maybe they were treated with something. I don't know. But last year we did get some good growth on the ginger, which was great.
Nice, thank you. Thanks, Tony. And would anyone else like to chime in on something that you've been trying to grow recently that's maybe new for you or new for other people?
Yeah, I've been growing some more fruit. So I've grown loganberries, blueberries, and figs. So for Christmas, I asked for fruit bushes, and I get them. And I've got an allotment, so it's getting very full of fruit bushes now, which saves me a lot of effort actually growing seasonal crops. The loganberries are great; they've just ripening now. The figs are a long way off, and the blueberries are really sour. So yeah, that's my recent stuff.
Wonderful. Thank you, Matthew. And Keith, would you like to chime in a little bit?
Yeah, I grew salad burnet last year. Don't know if you know it. Sanguisorba is the Latin name, and it's a little salad plant, and it tastes of cucumber.
Oh, nice.
Salad burnet.
Well, thank you. And I'll mention one of the plants that we've been growing in our gardens in recent years that we've found to be an interesting one. It's called Ashosha. It's like Achocha. And it's basically in the same family as squash, but it's a plant that's only about this big. And when it's a climbing plant, it's really nice to grow in areas, around balconies and urban areas. And basically, if we eat it when it's young, it tastes a bit like summer squash. But if we let it grow a bit bigger, you can actually fill it the way you would fill like a red pepper. So you can kind of fill it with rice and stuff and bake it. So that's been a really interesting one for us to try. So yeah, let's move on to the next question. If you could put that up for us here, Dan. So I've been a no-dig grower on my veg plot at home for years, but I've heard Ian Tolhurst say this only works for a while before it produces a nutrient-rich peat. That doesn't sound so bad, so can the panel explain what the problem with long-term no-dig is? Does this only apply to commercial-scale growing, and what the alternatives are? And so this is a question from Joe. Would anyone like to try answering this one for us?
Can I answer? Can I get
go for it, Matthew.
Right. Well, No Dig has had a moment in the British national press recently. It's really interesting actually, because I went down to B&Q, which is the biggest DIY garden centre chain in the UK. I went down to their trial nursery a few weeks ago, and weirdly, it was just me and a guy from the Daily Mail. And B&Q have got a range of new kind of mulches, kind of soil improvers called Mama Terra, right? So they were trying to sell these. So the guy from the Mail goes, "Oh, what's this no dig?" to me. So I said, "Oh, it's a thing. You want to talk to Charles Dowding, who's a no dig guru." Um, anyway, he did a bit on it, and it got in the paper. And then the Daily Telegraph rang me up and said, "Can you do a bit on no dig?" So I rang up Dowding, and I rang up Guy Barter from the Royal Horticultural Society, and I'd heard Tolly talk about this idea: if you get too much compost, you create a kind of peat bog. And so I asked Guy Barter, who's their chief horticulture advisor, and he said you really, really have to put on tons to create this peat bog. So it's not really going to be an issue for the home or allotment gardener. And the main issue is, in fact, you can't create enough compost. But as I say, no dig has had a moment, and it's suddenly become a thing amongst the general population. But a lot of them said they still want to dig their gardens.
Well, thank you, Matthew. And, my understanding of what the issue is, and again, this is maybe something that we could have Ian Tolhurst, share his thoughts himself about it in the future. But my understanding is that the issue isn't so much with no dig in and of itself. It's the issue that if absolutely huge amounts of organic matter are added to the soil, that there can become a point at which there are excess nutrients, and just that excess level of organic matter or excess level of nutrients can sort of counterintuitively end up causing some issues eventually. So I think the concern is that some no-dig gardeners might be adding such huge levels that it can eventually cause some issues. But I don't think of it as an issue with no-dig itself, perhaps more so an issue of over-amendment. Yeah, go for it, Keith.
Well, I mean, in terms of mentioning peat, we know that peat builds up because the humic acid, the breakdown of the vegetation there's so much of it, you end up becoming very acid. Humic acid builds up, and then everything stops. But if you were gardening, then you would be adding in some form of lime to counteract that. And I think that would be something you would want to address in a garden. If you were doing a lot of no-dig, you still need to be adding some kind of, well, certainly in Scotland, where you've high rainfall, washing that lime out into the lower subsoil, you have to be adding some kind of wood ash or lime to help that process.
All right, thank you, Keith. And I saw, Tony, that we had a little question popping up for you. I think it was one of the live questions from people who are watching on YouTube right now. And they were asking about what type of sweet potato you're currently growing, if you know the variety, and whether it's well adapted for England.
No, unfortunately, I didn't have a variety on there. I don't think I got it. I literally bought it from the local health food shop. I thought, let's give it a go. We did try the method where you put it in a glass of water, and quite frankly, it didn't seem to do well enough. It formed a few little roots, but the ones I actually potted up and put up quite high in the polytunnel, so it was a fair bit warmer than on the window shelf. They taken really well. I've probably got half a dozen plants growing now, some about 5-6 inches tall and spreading the way across. So, I mean, next time I can see if they've got a variety and add it to there, but it just said generically sweet potatoes, I'm afraid.
All right, well, thanks for sharing that. And it's nice to know that you went the most simple route you could, and it seems to be working for you. So that's good. And I know that we were shown very briefly another question that had popped up from the YouTube, but I didn't manage to catch that one. So Dan, if you'd like to pop it up again, you're welcome to. Or otherwise, you can just bring us to the next question. All right, so is anyone taking... Oh, it wasn't there quite long enough. Is anyone else taking part in the amaranth trial this year, a green vegetable that does not bolt in hot weather, growing for the first time, and interested in if anyone else is? So is there anyone on the panel who is growing amaranth right now? No? All right, so we can move on to the next question. What seeds can I plant at this time of year in our 2 raised beds, one of which doesn't get much sun? So if we're in a partially shaded area, almost at the beginning of July at this point, what could somebody plant in raised beds? Yes, Keith.
Well, I mean, it's funny. We think of lettuce as a summer crop, but it can grow in the shade. So I would be, I take it it's food rather than flowers. Well, I'll answer it from a food point of view. This time of year, you can be planting some of the Chinese, still plant some of the Chinese leaves, the Mizuna, Mabuna, all these ones, your pak choi can go in at this time of year. So I would be thinking about fast-growing mustard family greens, mustard greens. Cut and come again lettuce, so you're not having to ask it to do too much. Yeah, that would be my and maybe put in maybe some chives or something like that long term.
Yeah, and Tony and Matthew, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'd say turnips. The DEFRA Secretary of State, Therese Coffey, the other day said we should eat turnips and not import tomatoes. So, but you can plant turnip seed in July, and turnips are much maligned vegetable.
Yeah, I think we need some more turnip recipes to appreciate them more. But I know that they can be delicious if we cook them right.
Yeah, I slice them, the little white ones. Slice them really thinly and fry them with some soy sauce.
Oh, really? Nice. So dehydrated turnip chips.
Well, yeah.
Awesome. And I think we'll move on to our next question now. Dan, if you'd like to pop that up for us. can you provide me with recommendations for wild grasses and flowers that are appropriate for a barren section of our garden? This area receives minimal sunlight as a result of the surrounding trees. So, any recommendations for wild grasses and flowers? And I think, Keith, I would also be curious to know if you have any recommendations for herbs, because I think that in some cases there may be some herbs that can grow in some areas where, tomatoes and eggplant would have some trouble.
Yeah, I mean, some of the mints will do okay, although they do say mints like their roots in the damp in their head in the sun. Most of the things we think about as culinary herbs are Mediterranean, so all your sage, rosemary, lavender, thyme all do better in the sun. But yes, again, some of the salady stuff, that salad bun, seems to do okay in the shade. But otherwise, it's your bulbs, isn't it? It's planning for next year and putting a load of bulbs in. If you've got a shady area like that, then if it's not coniferous, then you've got sunlight coming in at the beginning of the year, and so that's where you want. That's the plan, isn't it? The bluebells and the crocuses and all these things are up early before the canopy closes in. So getting a load of that in would be good. Herb wise, yeah, you could try the mints.
Thank you. And would anyone else like to chime in with any ideas for flowers or grasses?
I'd just say, think, it's woodland, shady woodland, so things like foxgloves, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tony, go for it.
I was thinking of primroses, actually. They can do very well and edible as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it also depends, how humid the area is. If there's areas that are, damp and shady, I tend to look at, do ferns grow well there? Is there the possibility of getting, fiddleheads in, or even, mushroom logs and things like that? If we can take a look at what would actually grow from an edible perspective, in more of a forested setting, and try to get some of those plants in.
Yeah, definitely. And have a wander around your own, locale and see what does grow in the shade.
Yeah, always that good starting point, just to do some observation and find out what's already growing well, and see if we can favor the plants that are really naturally adapted. Dan, would you like to show us the next question? What are the key differences between stock-free organic and organic farming methods? So we have people here who are very experienced with stock-free growing, at least on the garden scale. So would you be able to tell our listeners some of the key differences in stock-free organic compared to the standard organic? Who would like to go first? I saw Mathew maybe putting up.
I think Tony would be best at this one.
All right, go for it, Tony. You're
I was asked which questions I like to answer, and I didn't add on this one, but obviously things with standard organic practice, there can be blood, bone, fish meal, etc. If you look at the standard potting compost, they have those included in the base formula. As veganic growers, we would obviously use things like ramie wood chip. Grass is a great source of that sort of thing. Weeds generally, I generally use like a weedy water for watering my plants. I get any old weeds, shove them in a barrel, and use that as a watering supply. So rather than using the suffering of animals to grow our crops, I would rather just bypass the middleman, so to speak, and go straight to the plants themselves. I mean, the plants contain all the nutrients. Animal products don't create nutrients in them. They don't add calcium into the mix or anything like that. They are just using what has been brought from the soil. So we would use instead plants that deep root bring nutrients up like comfrey, etc. So yeah, that's what I would say the main differences are. We just use animals directly and bypass the use of animals. Use plants directly.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll add too is that a lot of the animal products that are used, in standard organic farming could be in contact with things like antibiotics. This is actually especially problematic in North America because in North America, essentially any animal waste from factory farms can be used as fertilizer on organic farms. So that could be contaminated with, pesticide residues and antibiotics and heavy metals in some cases. The organic rice supply, for example, in North America has issues with arsenic contamination. And there's more than one reason for that, but one of the reasons was that chicken manure was used for years. Factory farm chicken manure is used for years in situations where organic rice is grown, and it's very persistent. The arsenic was added in the past to chicken feed, and then ended up in the organic food supply. So there are issues like that can be avoided by working directly with plant products rather than with animal waste. And I don't know all the regulations in the UK. I think the UK regulations aren't quite as wide open as it is in North America to add in factory farm residues, but still there's a lot of problems that can come into the system when animal products are used, and one of them quite simply is some types of bacterial contamination like E. coli and salmonella. If we look at outbreaks for salmonella that have happened with lettuce and with spinach, well, it's not necessarily the lettuce or the spinach that inherently has salmonella. It can be the addition of manure that's used that can lead to those contamination issues. Another difference between stock-free organic and organic is that oftentimes organic will bring animal manure from other farms. And so a lot of organic farms are more reliant on off-farm inputs. And so that creates a lot of ghost acres where there's significant amounts of land that are being used to feed animals and to have animal farms in order to then, move that manure onto an organic farm. And so oftentimes organic farms have a much bigger footprint than just the farm itself. Whereas with stock-free organic, there's a much bigger focus on farms creating their own sources of fertility right on the farm itself by using techniques like green manures. So just from an environmental standpoint, stock-free organic farms tend to use less land, less water, and less energy by not being connected back to industrial animal farming. So maybe we can move on now to the next question. Dan, if you would like to share that with us. So we have a large cherry tree in our backyard, and we haven't had many cherries this year. Some years we get loads. What can I do to keep the tree healthy, and should I prune it? Also, we noticed some little bugs in the cherries. Are they safe to eat, and what can I do about them? So this is a question from Diana in Chester. I know that many of us here are growing some of our own fruit trees and fruit bushes. I know I tend to personally take a completely non-interventionist approach with my fruit trees. I tend to let them do their thing. Some years I have a lot of plums, some years a lot of cherries, some years a lot of, pears or apples, and it tends to kind of go up and down each year which trees do well, and it's always a bit of a surprise. But personally, I just tend to plant them, and I'll add a bit of plant-based, fertilizer around them. Like I might add some chip branch wood or some hay, for example. But I don't tend to prune my trees or treat them for insects in any way at all. So I'm just interested for other folks on the panel, what's your own approach with your own trees, and do you have any advice? Yes, Matthew.
All right. Well, I've got a cherry tree, and it's looking okay this year. Not brilliant, not as good as last year, but I think what happens with cherries a bad year is because there's a late frost, and it struggles to produce much fruit. this year is an okay year. I mean, I like you, Megan, I don't do anything to mine. I just leave it. I mean, I might mulch around it a bit, so if it's dry, but other than that, I just leave it and just pick them, and they're starting to ripen now, and I think they're going to be okay.
Yeah, and Tony and Keith, if you have any fruit trees, whether it's a cherry tree or any other types of fruit trees or bushes, do you have your own approach in terms of how you treat your trees and bushes? Are there ways in which you intervene, or are you mostly non-interventionist? Go for it, Tony.
Okay, well, this will give you a bit of a laugh. I used to have this gorgeous cherry tree where I lived in Derby. I mean, it was huge. It's 20, 30 foot broad, 20, 30 foot high. And my son used to play in there. And for years, I wondered what the cherries tasted like, because quite frankly, they were never any on the trees. The birds got them every time. I mean, I remember after about 3 years that I finally got a couple of cherries that the birds had missed. I mean, there was thousands of cherries on this tree. And I never realized they were black cherries, because I'd never actually seen one get to the stage of being ripened. And I thought, I've got to do something about this, because they were delicious. They were like morello cherry. So I tried everything I could think of. I tried the plastic bottles with aluminium foil in there dangling from the thing, and the birds come along, just look at themselves and they go, I'm looking good. I tried some scarab web, which was a webbing that's designed to put up in the trees and keep them off. That just got caught up in the tree, couldn't get it down again. I tried netting. I got to a stage where I had a little fake furry cat's tail under a box with it swinging in the wind to make it look like I was a cat. That didn't work. I tried everything. And I came across this old organic gardening magazine, and I read it and I went, no, that's just a step too far. But I tasted these cherries. I thought, I've got to give it a go. And apparently my next door neighbour, she came to me the next day and says, you nearly killed me. I went, why? What? She said, well, I came out here drinking my cup of tea, saw what you'd done to the cherry tree, and I nearly choked on my tea. She was laughing that much. And this old magazine suggested that before they get to the stage of the birds want them, you get old tights and you pull them over the branches and tie them off. So the birds are sitting there and they go like this, pecking, and they just bounce off them. And I got 66 pounds of these most gorgeous cherries ever. I mean, it took ages, like step ladder and like this and pulling them on. And it looked absolutely hilarious. But if you wanted cherries and not the birds to get them, that was the only way to do it. So I didn't have any other problems apart from birds. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Tony, for sharing your technique for old stockings. And now we all know what to do if we ever find a big pile of old stockings somewhere.
There you go.
Great. And I think Dan very briefly showed us a question that was live on YouTube a couple of minutes ago. Dan, would you be able to pop that up for us again? All right, so we've got some Drosophila that are new. Our native ones can't get through healthy fruit skins. The invasive, non-native ones can drill into the healthy fruit, including stone fruit, and pick early, remove diseased. So it sounds like this person is having some issues with some invasive insects that are getting into the healthy fruit. Does anyone have any advice? I guess the stocking advice from Tony might apply in this situation too.
I don't know. Depends on the weave, I suppose. Your fishnets aren't going to help you much on this. So any Rocky Horror fans out there, you're out of luck.
And what type of stockings did you use on your trees, Tony? Was it fishnet or was it was a classic?
Just sort of weave ones, that's average everyday ones, really. And yeah, I don't know whether it would stop them drilling through, but I don't know. We'll have to find someone to do a test for us.
Yeah,
that would stop a fruit fly.
Yeah. If anyone wants to try.
Keep them away.
Wonderful. And I think we might have time for one more question here. All right, we have a group of questions. Let's see. From Corinne. So one question is, How can I improve my soil fertility? I make my own compost, but I never have enough. So let's start with that question. So what beyond, making more compost, which is, always an option, because oftentimes making more compost is just a matter of getting more veggie scraps from some of our neighbors. Oftentimes they're throwing them into the garbage. So that's always an option, just to make more. But beyond making more compost, do you have techniques that you particularly recommend? Keith, go for it.
Grow a lot of peas, pea family, legumes, peas, beans. But then cut the plants off, leave the roots in the soil, decompose, and then the nitrogen that those beans have fixed will go back into the soil. I suppose it's learning the difference between soil feeds and soil improvers. Leaf mold is an amazing soil improver. It's not so much of a feed, but it aerates and adds humus into it. So, and that's something that we can often get either from the local authority or kind of gather it ourselves, stamp it down, take a bit of chicken wire, make a hoop, fill it full of leaves. It's an anaerobic process to stamp it down, or stick it in black polythene, black bags, and stamp it down, let it rot down. That's giving you a lot of free stuff. I suppose not beside roads and stuff, but otherwise, buy as much compost in as you can.
Yeah, and buying in compost veganically can differ from country to country. I know here in Canada, we do not have a source of veganic compost commercially on the market. I know that in England there's a few options, and in the United States there's a couple of options too. But in some countries, it really comes down to do it yourself. And so your suggestions of making our own leaf mold and growing legumes, to cut those legumes down as a fertility source. The nice thing about some of those techniques is they can really be used in pretty much any climate. And yeah, and I would love to see more veganic compost options on the market in every country. It would be wonderful if everyone would be able to access that if need be. And Tony and Matthew, do you have anything to add to this question about how we can fertilize if we are short on compost? Go ahead, Tony.
I was going to say, as you said, I've collected from neighbours before now. They're more than happy to give you food scraps and stuff like that. And grass cuttings, I always get a lot of grass cuttings from neighbours. And also I've had neighbours in the past where they've had wood chip, which has been an excellent source. But another thing you could do long term is to try and grow your own mushrooms on logs, etc. So once these logs have finally had their use of mushrooms, they should be quite friable and perhaps be chipped and then be used on the soil. So that's another way. We've got a local place in Carmarthen. They do some rather nice from green waste stuff. It's not perfect. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it's 100% perfect, but you go to some of these places and they're full of bits of plastic, and so you've really got to check your sources if you're buying something where it's a green waste product. But yeah, and I went down to my mum's, and we went for a walk with the dog down by this field, and around there they're quite slow to take up new ideas. We came across this field of wheat, and there was peas growing up in between the wheat everywhere throughout it, and I thought, I've been coming here for like 30 years, and it's the first time I've ever seen that. So perhaps slowly the farmers are catching on, and it's certainly something we can do ourselves.
We've lost our host.
Hi there, back one more time. So Dan, would you like us to do one final question from Corinne's list of questions? All right, we can just choose one of them here. So she was asking about why it's bad to use horse manure. Should she weed between her plants, like climbing bean plants, and whether the weeds are taking nutrients? And one year her cucumbers were very bitter, and she was told it was due to not enough water. and how much water do cucumbers need? So our panelists, you're welcome to jump in on any of these questions. What are the issues with horse manure? Should somebody weed between their climbing bean plants? And bitter cucumbers. So if you'd like to pop in on one of those questions, you are welcome to as we wrap up. Yes, Keith.
What you said about, horses, they're often fed concentrates.
Mm-hmm.
And worming tablets and all the rest of it. I mean, it does seem a shame. It is quite a resource, but there's always going to be issues with any kind of animal product.
Yeah, and with the issue with the worming tablets is, that, it can have an effect on soil life. And so, I know that some people, do, they are able to access, for example, horse manure from neighbors, but there's all of those questions about what those horses are being fed, if there's worming tablets that could affect soil life, but also just straight up issues like E. coli. Again, this can be, problematic to have, forms of, fecal bacteria that can contaminate a garden. And Tony and Mathew, is there anything else that you'd like to say as we're wrapping up here? Yeah, Tony, you're on mute.
There was an article in issue 45, maybe, about this one woman in America who'd got some very nasty illness from animal-based manures. Her family had bought her a pile of these manures, a present, for her garden. She didn't want it because she grew veganically, and she ended up seriously ill with this. Obviously, if you're a member, you can get access to all our back issues going right the way back to our gardening guide. But I think it's issue 44, 45, something like that, if people want to have a look at that.
Wonderful. And Mathew, maybe I can give you the last word if you have anything that you would like to add to any of Corinne's questions.
Well, I'd say go back to what we said before, that horses are sort of farmed animals, so that they don't particularly want to be domesticated by humans. So why should we use their waste? It's a byproduct of the basically the farming industry.
All right, thank you, Mathew. And I would like to thank everybody today for taking the time to come and share your knowledge with us, to give advice to people who are, like all of us, learning as they go in their gardening journeys. So thank you, Tony. Thank you, Mathew. Thank you, Keith, for being here with us today. And I'd also like to remind everyone that you can support the growing revolution and join the Vegan Organic Network for as little as £16 a year. And as part of that, you'll get the full color biannual magazine. And you can see some of these wonderful biannual magazines right behind Tony, right on this, this banner right here. It's a wonderful magazine that is totally dedicated to veganic growing, and it's written by veganic farmers, gardeners, and people who have veganic allotments all around the world. So I really recommend joining the network and learning from each other and sharing our experiences. So thank you again, Tony. Thank you, Mathew. Thank you, Keith. And thank you to everyone who joined us in the audience today and everyone who's watching the replay after. We're so happy that you took that time to join us and to learn about veganic gardening together.
Go well.
Thank you. And please remember to share and like the video, please.